What I'm going to do is talk about Queen Anne's lace, this beautiful flower that most of you have probably seen. And the intention is to go through all 12 windows of plant perception with one flower. And so in the training in the lessons, we've looked at all of the 12 windows of plant perception, but using different plants as examples for those windows. And so looking at one plant and how it flows through all of those windows is a really good way to kind of integrate all of that information and to really see the holistic view of one plant. So it's something that I love to do. And we start with the first window, form and gesture. Queen Anne's lace is quite interesting. It has some unique characteristics. It's that beautiful lacy flower in the Apiaceae family. And many of the flower heads have this on the upper right. You can see, if you look closely, a single flower that's a different color. Now, not all of the flower heads have that different color flower, but they all have the single flower in the middle of the whole. And that's one of the beautiful and unique qualities of this flower. It also has different types of stages in its flowering, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. But it has a very upright gesture and beautifully kind of reaching up to the heavens with its lacy flower head. And because it is part of the Apiaceae family, it is an umbel flower, and these are the umbels. It's made up of an umbel, and each umbel has many different umbellets, and that's a common characteristic of that family. But what's unique with Queen Anne's lace is that it has these lower bracts, and that is also helpful in identifying the plant. So that orientation in space, we just saw that it has that strong vertical gesture with both the flower reaching up to the heavens, but also underneath the ground, it has a very long taproot. In fact, this is the wild carrot. It's the original carrot, so it's known for that long taproot. Of course, the Queen Anne's lace, it is white, not orange. Looking at the geometric relationships, we can see that there are these forked bracts that may be indicative of the number three, and each little tiny flower on of the in the umbellet holding these flowers, they're little five-petaled flowers with five stamens as well. And the going over to the right, looking at that flower head again, it's really interesting. That pattern, it looks like kind of a snowflake or a fractal. But what's so profound, I think, about this flower is that it's got the point in the center of the circle. And that is a fundamental starting point in sacred geometry, which is something I've been recently studying. It represents the 0 point, the beginning, the foundation of all creation. It's a very powerful symbol that also speaks to access of to the divine plane. And it's the Egyptian symbol for Ra, the solar logos. There's also that idea of the five-pointed star when you look at any flower petal that has five, or flower that has 5 points to it. And then, not last but not least, over here, we can see how it creates a sphere. So that's also sort of a powerful symbolism as well. In that Apiaceae plant family, There are many food and herb plants like celery and parsley and dill, fennel, lots of these wonderful culinary plants and medicinal plants that we use. Also, some very poisonous and toxic plants, like poison hemlock and giant hogweed. And it's one of the reasons that proper identification is so critical in this family. You really have to know what you're doing. Um, but again, the Daucus carota is the genus and species of the Queen Anne's lace, the wild carrot, and it's actually the same species that our cultivated carrot is from. It's just the cultivated carrot has been bred from a naturally occurring subspecies called sativa, and that's how we have our carrots that we eat on our table today. It's literally the same genus and subspecies or genus and species as the wild carrot that you'll see growing on the roadside. And I'll use the term wild carrot and Queen Anne's lace interchangeably, as you'll probably already noticed. But this just shows some of the differences, mainly in the root, because the cultivated carrot has been bred for its root to make it um, fleshier and sweeter and more tasty than the spindly white root of the wild carrot. Also, there's another species of note. So the Queen Anne's lace is not native to North America. It's probably originated in the Middle East. It's domesticated in a lot of places around the world and Europe. Um, but in North America, there is something called Daucus pusillus, the American wild carrot, and it's very much the same as Queen Anne's lace, except it's much, much smaller. And it hybrids very easily with the Queen Anne's lace. So it's pretty hard to tell apart unless you're an expert. And what I find so fascinating, one of the most interesting parts of this plant observation, and I've sat with it many times. I've made flower essence with it. I've tuned and made the essence 3 different times over the course of a few years. And what strikes me the most is how it's so dynamic in its growth, in its gesture during its life cycle. It starts out sort of concave with a concave cup when it's immature, and that is probably like this on the far left. You're going to see how it's just starting to flower and it's still in a bit of a cup situation. And then as it matures, the flower head will flatten out and even become convex. So if you can see my cursor, there's more of an example here where it looks a little bit rounded like an umbrella. And then as the flowers all keep maturing and the fruits start to ripen, which become the seeds, then it once again becomes cup-like and concave and creates this what they call like a bird's nest or a bird cage with those bracts that I mentioned before that protects these seeds. And you'll see when it's in mid-bloom, so it's a summertime bloom. It it starts around May and it's through September, but it's common to see all these different life cycles at one time in a patch of Queen Anne's lace. And another noteworthy thing is that since it's a biennial, as this family is that you won't even see a flower in the first year. So these have all been growing for 2 years. This is the second year that when it's all flowering like this. And by the time it's done, it creates these seed balls that just kind of fall off and roll into tumbleweeds to disperse their seed. And in with the four elements, so we talk about plants having, you know, represent, the four elements are represented in all humans and in all plants, but we see a dominance of one or more of the elements when we look at a plant. And to me, the air element is the most prominent in a Queen Anne's lace, and that's just signified by a couple things like the upright gesture, the thin, very thin leaves. There's a lot of spaciousness in with the leaves and in the laciness of the flower. And you can just see that. I think there's also an earth aspect to it because of that really deep taproot. And then it's also got there's a lot of woody green pungent aromas associated with the leaves, the smell of the leaves. And so there's a bit of a earth with it. So I think the most dominant element is air with some earth. There might be a small amount of fire if you consider the irritating compounds on the leaves that might cause dermatitis. Sometimes that can be an indicator of a little bit of a fire element. And I don't see much water element in the wild carrot. So that's what my thoughts are on that. Um, in window number 7, we look at what relationship this plant has to other kingdoms of nature. And obviously, the relationship with humans cannot be, overlooked because we've been cultivating them we started with the wild carrot and then cultivated that subspecies that has become such a huge part of our food system. And interestingly, initially they were cultivated not for their root, but more for their aromatic leaves and their seeds. The seeds have a lot of medicinal properties that we'll look at. This plant probably originated in the Middle East, but the seeds have been found in Europe dating back to probably 3,000 BC. It's just, widely cultivated around the world. And the what they've done with cultivating the roots is, as I said, to increase that sweetness and minimize the woody core. There's also quite a relationship with insects, just because if you've ever observed the flowers, you'll see there's a lot of different insects that are around them, the flies, the ladybugs, and they're always, kind of buzzing with something. And is used as a beneficial weed or a companion plant to crops to attract the predatory wasps that will then kill garden pests. But alternatively, it's very interesting that in cultivated carrot crops, there's actually a carrot fly that's specific to that domesticated carrot and is a pest and can affect those crops. So I did find that sort of interesting. When we look at the colors, of course, white is the predominant. And, some associations with the color white are purity and peace, innocence or sovereignty, humility, light. I think there's a big light aspect here, maturity and spirituality and reverence. And yet, there's also quite a few flowers that have a pinkish tinge to them, either when they're young and sometimes persisting. And I've seen some over by the coast, particularly more pink than the ones I've seen in the fields. So just, I'm not sure what causes that, but there is a sweetness to it, an innocence, it lends to that feminine quality that I think Queen Anne's lace has. And it when you look at the color of that one center flower, if it does have one, again, it sometimes doesn't have a color there, and that's normal. So it doesn't always have to have that center flower. But that is usually a shade of red that goes from pink to really dark, even almost black looking in color. And there's even maybe some greenish tinge to the young plants. So I think all of that, we think Queen Anne's lace, oh, it's a white flower, but there's some subtleties to it that I think lend to the color, I guess, analysis that you could think about when you're thinking about this window of perception. And I've got a picture of the roots. The Queen Anne's lace, the wild carrot, is white. It's not going to be any of these colors that the cultivated carrot has. But I do think it's just an interesting thing to note that it has been cultivated to have these other colors of the rainbow. With the window number 9, when we look at the sense perceptions, it is the foliage, as I mentioned, is strongly aromatic. It's reminiscent of parsley when it's crushed. Um, and now I've dug up a wild carrot, and it was a very large, gnarly root of a flower already flowering, so second year plant, and didn't look anything like a carrot. It was more like a big, gnarly parsnip or something like that, and cut it up. And it, I mean, even before I cut it, I remember taking that root out of the ground and smelling it, and it smells like a carrot. I mean, it smells exactly like a carrot. So that was kind of a fun discovery. And if you are going to come across these in the wild and you want to touch all the lacy leaves, just remember that because it is in that Apiaceae family. Well, first of all, be sure you've identified it properly. And secondly, even if it is a wild carrot, it can still trigger, it still can, for some people, cause dermatitis or trigger photosensitivity because of the compounds on its leaves. And the seeds being used in culinary purposes for so long, I mean, they have an aromatic, pungy, and spicy taste. And I have not had a chance to try a young Queen Anne's lace root to see how much sweeter it might be than that bitter old one that it gets to when it's in its second year. But it's said to be slightly sweet only in when it's young. I did some cursory looking at chemical substances and processes, and there's always, I mean, there is a lot, so there wasn't really time to go through, especially with the carrot seed essential oil, which is there's a lot of studies on that. There's a lot of chemical constituencies that have been identified. But what we know and what's most well known about carrots is its beta carotene content, right? I mean, that's what we've always heard. We've always, heard eat carrots for, the beta carotene, which converts to vitamin A and helps with eyesight or vitamin A deficiencies. What I did learn, though, is that most of this is in the leaves, not the roots. So, like eating carrots really isn't that going to give you that much beta carotene. And in the wild carrot, it has they looked in the study, they looked at beta carotene or B carotene, and they also looked at A carotene. And they compared the wild carrot, the hybrid carrot, and the cultivated carrot. And the wild carrot has mostly beta carotene, and it's again all in the leaves. And the cultivated carrot had as much carotene, but not beta carotene. It had more of the A carotene. So that's just a random fact that's kind of interesting in how, the wild versus the cultivated changes. There were a lot of medicinal and herbal uses and made, these mostly made from the seeds in traditional herbalism, but also the roots, the flowers, and the leaves. And really has become popular over the last few years um, with skin health and beauty compounds like facial serums and creams and skincare products. There are three different oils that you can find with made from, or two different that are made from carrot seeds, and one is the cold pressed seed oil, and the other is the steam distilled essential oil. But I've also seen oils made from macerated roots, and all three of those are used for their like emollient and antioxidant properties and protecting the skin against free radical damage and other great things that it does for the skin. So the like I said, there's a lot of medicinal. I mean, look at the time here. I'm going to have to quickly run through this, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But what's probably jumping out at you with this slide is the word conscious contraception, and it has a long history of being used by women, taken during specific times in the cycle, and that helps make the womb slippery to prevent implantation. Alternatively, it also is used to tone the uterus to prepare for pregnancy. So, a long history of the seeds used by women in managing their conceptions. And there's even an old nursery rhyme that says, Queen Anne's lace saves woman's place. I love that flower to keep my power. It was named for Queen Anne, the Queen of England, Scotland, and Ireland, and the legend about her creating lace and pricking her finger, and that drop of blood represents the dark center flower in the middle of the flower. Supposedly, that's how this plant got its name. There's a lot of lore about Queen Anne's lace that really has to do with identifying this plant. So you can, yeah, I think that's really fascinating. The queen has hairy legs is something I learned in plant identification a long time ago when I was learning to identify this plant, meaning that she's got hairs on the legs, on the stems of the plant. And we talked about pricking her finger, that blood, that dark center flower. But also, I learned that there was a tale that the queen travels in May, and I mean that's symbolizing when she blooms, when the flower blooms. And the queen became a bird watcher in her old age. What a funny thing to say to basically represent this birdcage effect that happens with the seed ball. So I think that's really interesting in how these old folk tales and myths, maybe a lot of them are there to help people identify plants properly, especially one in this family that has deadly consequences if you make a mistake. And yeah, just some other tips or facts about Queen Anne. I thought it was very interesting that she was pregnant 17 times and lost almost all of her children to miscarriages or being stillborn, and which is, just sad story. But it is sort of a weird, interesting coincidence about the medicinal use in conscious contraception. And I don't know if there's a connection there or not, but I thought that was interesting. Now, like I said, I've sat with this plant a lot of times. 10 years ago was my first, almost 10 years ago, and this was actually the first flower essence that I ever made. So that's why I went back a few times to do more attunements and to kind of see what else she had to say. And some of the messages that I received were really about honoring your cycles and listening to your body and cultivating appropriate timing. She very much was telling me about practicing discernment, and that in order to do that, in order to see clearly, that I needed to remain rooted in my strength. And I felt very much an activation of sovereignty in myself, hearing the message about feeling empowered in the choices that I made, and also knowing that I was protected and to cultivate protection for myself and for others But knowing that if I felt vulnerable and needed to self-protect, that it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength. FES, of course, really looks at this plant as one of spiritual insight and vision and talks about it helping to integrate psychic faculties with sexual and emotional aspects of the self, and describes in further detail in the repertory about how it harmonizes both the higher and the lower energies so that one can stay connected to the earth, yet also be emotionally clear and objective in one's spiritual insight and vision. And so, when, this is an example of developing a relationship with the plant, and the messages that you get may tie into the messages that other people get. And it's not that one is right or one is wrong, it's that they're all parts of this whole. They're all aspects, they're all octaves. And so, I saw a lot about practicing discernment and seeing clearly while rooted in strength, and FES brings that even to, more to the spiritual insight and vision, and linked it to psychic faculties. So it's all part of that whole picture of Queen Anne's lace. And I'll end on the um, what Patricia Kaminsky wrote as the affirmation for Queen Anne's lace. My eyes were created by light and for light. Sense knowing illumines my soul. Soul knowing illumines my senses. Through this holy union, I grow in wisdom.